Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and this video is called Seeing the Fuller Reality, the Allegory of the Ducks. So astrological magic and astrology are applied spirituality. They don't work through material energetic means. They're not scientific at all. So it's very useful to understand the underlying spiritual reality to practice astrology and astrological magic, and also very useful to have a fuller really, rather than a partial view of reality. Because it's really not possible, again, to have a full view of reality. We're always modeling, we're always looking and thinking from a particular perspective, and no one view or perspective is entirely accurate. However, we can test a perspective by seeing if you're ever surprised. If you think you have an accurate perspective, then you should never ever be surprised by anything. If you think your worldview actually fits reality, then you should never be surprised. Again, nobody should do what they shouldn't do. You know, anything that happens that you're not happy with, again, you don't have a complete worldview if you're not understanding what's going on. Anything happens that you don't expect. So this is useful, I think, in terms of getting this, I said, this fuller view of reality. So what's an allegory? Allegory is basically a story that expresses a deeper meaning. So this is the allegory, really the story of the ducks. My wife and I lived in Washington, D.C. This is in the kind of early 2000s. We lived in a neighborhood called Cleveland Park in Northwest D.C. on Connecticut Avenue. And it's right across from the National Zoo. Now, the National Zoo has a lot of outdoor ponds, so it attracts a lot of wild mallard ducks. So wild mallards are perfectly fine living in the city if they can find the space, if they can fit themselves in. So every spring, and this is obviously outside of D.C., you're going to see lots of stories about mallard duck rescues, and this comes from mallards nesting in the city, and then after the ducklings hatch, they try to lead them to water, so then they have to get rescued. So we lived in a really large apartment building. It had a really big enclosed courtyard. It had grass and trees and a really big fountain. And so the mallards found that really attractive. It was nice and quiet, it was green, and they had this fountain with the water. It wasn't very big, but at least there was some water, so that was really, really nice for them. So you'd have at least one hen, that's a female duck. They would nest in the courtyard every year. And then typically a drake, which is the male duck, they don't hang around for the entire process of raising the ducklings, but they will kind of help the hen out by chasing everybody else off so that the hen has that territory for themselves. So the mother duck would nest in the bushes, and she'd sit on her nest, basically all the time. She'd only leave to eat. We'd kind of scope out where she was, but we would leave her alone. We wouldn't bother her. So when the ducklings hatched, she would then lead them to the fountain. That makes sense to her. The first problem is that adult ducks can easily get in the fountain, and the ducklings couldn't. They're so much smaller, and they can't fly. So here, our job as assistants to the ducks, to wild ducks, really began. And again, I want to emphasize with this, these are wild ducks. People would come along and say, are these your pets? It's like, no, they're not pets. They're wild ducks. They're not domesticated. And really our job was to take care of the human created problems so they could sort of live their free and wild lives, to help them interact with this crazy human infrastructure and city that had been set up, and the humans and everything they were involved with, to make that as smooth as possible and to make so they could live as wild ducks. So the first thing we did was to ramp the fountain. So we got these there's pieces of slate, the kind of square, slate, and we just put them up on the side, kind of sloped all the way around the fountain so they could get in. And at first the ducklings, they had no idea what to do. The mom was sitting in the fountain and she's saying, "Come on in," and they're like, we can't get in. So finally one duckling would figure it out, and then whatever one duckling does, the rest quickly copy. So they're very good at social learning. So and then the problem was getting in the water. Like, I don't want to do that. It seems weird. And then again, if one did it, they all jumped in, and then they had great fun paddling all over the place. So then the next problem. So ducks, they naturally live in the water, but not on the land. So in the courtyard, there's a tiny little fountain, but the rest of the time they're running around in the grass, eating bugs or whatever. And they're very vulnerable to crows because they're so small. So for the first 2 weeks, we basically had to do a dawn to dusk crow patrol in the courtyard. So we'd get up before dawn, and somebody had to be sitting out there with them all day long to make sure the crows didn't come in. And we just crows would come along, we just kind of clap and scare them off, and that made the crows angry, but it saved the ducklings. So then the next problem was there really wasn't enough food in the courtyard for the ducklings, so my wife, after doing research on duckling nutrition requirements, started supplementing their diet. So that made them very happy. But we had very, very careful, give them the right amount, and I think it was like peas and all sorts of different kinds of vegetable type stuff, and a certain amount of cat food because they needed a certain amount of protein and everything. So very carefully balanced diet. So then the next problem was a human problem. So we had to deal with stuff like stopping management from spraying pesticide, getting people to not bring their dogs out. We had to stop people. The biggest problem was stopping people from feeding the ducklings, which has made people very unhappy. They really wanted to feed them, but when you feed them white bread, which is what they always did, it's basically equivalent to getting them huge amounts of candy. It's really bad for them, particularly since we're being very careful to watch their diet. But all in all, things managed to move along, and under the careful watch of their mother, and some years we even had additional adult female duck help out. They grew like crazy. It seemed like every day they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So finally they fledged, which is to develop their mature plumage, and they basically got bigger and bigger until they got to almost the size of being adult ducks. And another thing that we would do would be to clean out the fountain. So once a week we'd take down the ramps, we'd put up a temporary fence so they wouldn't get in, and then we'd drain the fountain, wash it out, and then refill it. And the ducks would wait till we're done, and then they'd rush in, and they just love splashing and diving in the clean water. And they're getting to the point where they're actually flying. That's really incredible. They would dive underwater, and they would come splashing out of the water and fly up into the air, and then splash back in the fountain, and all of them would be splashing around and really excited. So what was happening was they were big enough, and their plumage had developed to a point where they could fly, but they weren't flying. I mean, they would do short hops, maybe 10 feet or so, but they didn't, what was the point of flying? I mean, here they were in the courtyard, it was whatever, a couple hundred feet, square, what else is there? This is, for them, this is the entire world. And so they got to the point where they just were just hanging out and they weren't flying, and we realized we really need to do something about this. So what we did was we lured them up onto the first story. There's a flat roof, kind of first story roof all the way around the courtyard, and we kind of lured them up there. And that was a little complicated. We had kind of get them up, put some boards down and get them a little higher and a little higher and a little higher until they finally get up on the roof. So they get up on the roof and they'd be eating, and then they look around, and oh my gosh, there's the whole city. You could see the trees and the streets and the buildings and everything. There's this huge, amazing, giant world out there. And they would it was really fun watching them because they just would be tripping out. It was incredible watching them because they were just like, wow. So it's interesting, there was about 10 ducklings, and they all kind of varied in terms of their response to getting up on the roof, because some of them almost immediately flew off because they saw that and they're like, hey, instinctively they knew this is what they wanted to do. They didn't want to stay in the courtyard anymore. They're going to fly off. They flew off on their own. And after a while, more ducks went, until finally we only had one left, who was much more timid. And he was lonely, though. Again, ducks like to be social, and he was all by himself, but he just didn't want to leave the courtyard. It was safe. So finally his mother came back and got him, and they quacked at each other for a while, and finally then he flew off with her. So he finally was able to make that jump. So this is the allegory of the ducks. And so it's interesting because it really does remind me of Plato's Allegory of the Cave, but I think it's better. Plato's Allegory of the Cave, he's like, you've got some people and you chain them in a cave and they're watching the wall and there's some shadows, and it's like very, very artificial in a way. I mean, it's a good allegory, but it just seems like, this is really sort of made up thing. Whereas the duck stuff really happened to us. And you could see, and the ducks were smart too. I mean, you could see they're sentient beings. You could see them thinking, like I said, they really believed that their entire world was with that limited courtyard. And so I think it's, really an excellent allegory of enlightenment. We are all, and I am at this moment, trapped in this courtyard of the consensus reality. Trapped in this idea that we're this physical body, that we're this ego self, and we're looking at everything from that particular perspective. And we, at the same time, we're actually living in this much wider reality. If we could just get a glimpse of it, and then we could fly off into it. So very, very interesting. Like I said, we have these experiences day to day. Each moment is an opportunity to become enlightened. There's no other place you have to go to. There's not some other thing to see. If I get to a different state, it's like you have the Buddha nature. You have the complete ability right now to contain consciousness, to be able to be enlightened. In fact, you are enlightened at this moment. You're just not realizing it. In fact, you're just believing that you're not enlightened. So again, my advice in here was, like I said, be a duck, learn from others. They're amazing at doing that. And if you can wake up, then there's this incredible wide world out there of enlightenment and of high consciousness that awaits for you. So again, I thought I would offer that off, the allegory of the ducks, and I think that as we do astrological and spiritual practice, it's very easy to get stuck into the physical effects or the what's going to get me or what's going to do for me. But again, all these spiritual practices can help us open up to the underlying spiritual reality. Again, always useful to have a fuller view of a reality and to live in a more spiritually aware way and a higher consciousness of what's going on. So I hope you find that useful. I'm going to continue to be doing some more of these more spiritually oriented videos. Again, like I said, I've kind of been pulled in my life towards that. I hope you find them interesting, as well as continuing to do strictly practical astrology and astrological magic videos.